With the year in Rise of Kingdoms coming to an end, in today's video I want to cover my favorite shorts videos. So in this video we're going to have a small compilation of 1 to 2 videos that I thought were my favorite for each month, and maybe even some additional notes about what I found interesting about the topic or some extra tips or corrections that I may have missed in the initial video. Without further ado, let's get started. Another frequent question I have been getting as of the release of iconic tiers is whether refining or iconic tiering is better for your blueprints. Since iconic tiers require blueprints, both have conflicting costs. The same goes for legendary material investment. So which should you pursue first? First, I'll speak in favor of iconicing first. Iconic tiers are guaranteed, meaning you don't have to risk a plus 25 instead of the full 100 refine, giving a guaranteed, although reduced, boost to your overall strength. It's also worth mentioning that iconic tiers are affected by the expertise, but the expertise doesn't have to be attained before the iconic tier to get the bonus, meaning you can iconic now and refine later. Next, in favor of refining first, refining gives a higher overall stat boost for the investment, even at the maximum for refines, which means that overall greater rewards is in refining over a longer term, even if you don't get the guaranteed stats on the first try. As with most things in this game, the decision's ultimately yours, as both have merit. Here are 3 talent trees most desperately in need of buffs or reworks in Rise of Kingdoms. For red trees, the leadership tree is the most in need of a rework. While the integration tree is also really awful, the leadership tree affects far more commanders and puts many mixed unit commanders behind relevance due to their generally weak talent utility. Next, for blue trees, we have the defense tree. While the attack tree is equally bad, the defense tree is on far more commanders and holding them back, and the ones that are on are certainly held back by overall weak options within the tree, the keystone talent being generally awful for consistency for the talent investment. Last, and most probably least, for the yellow trees is the versatility tree. There's just nothing on this tree that warrants investment, and it pretty much breaks with the overall goal of consistency that you want in your commander talents, with everything being completely inconsistent and just adding a lot of randomness that you don't need in the game. Here are the 3 best civilizations to get the biggest head start when beginning from day 1 for each troop type. First, for infantry, we have China. With the increased upgrade speed and buildings and access to the best epic commander in the game in Sun Tzu at day 1, you are set up quickly for success in the early game and can get your buildings up quicker, leading to more resources and less stoppage on account of resources and building levels. Next, we have Egypt for archers, with a solid archer commander at day 1 and a great balance of both research and build speeds to help your research and buildings reach new heights faster, as even the small boost is significant over the term of your development. Last, but certainly not least, we have Germany for cavalry. While you do not get an epic cav commander on day 1, you get a solid T4 unit, increased training speed for more units earlier, and increased AP generation to help you get more barbarians hunted, more speed ups gained, and more resources gained through this process. Here are some do's and don'ts of gem spending. First, do line up your gem spending with more than gems in it. If you're going to spend them anyway, might as well get as much value as you can. And the results are great, especially while the frequency is enough that you have plenty of time to build back up and hit another 7,000 tier and some more gold heads. Next, don't let gems burn a hole in your pocket. They're a precious resource, so using them sparingly gives you more efficiency and can mean the difference of months between milestones reached. Lastly, do take every opportunity to earn gems that you can. Arc, Chronicles, Occupation rewards, these are all free rewards for doing things that you would do already, so make the most of them. Make sure to have as many players in the alliance as possible when you complete them to maximize kingdom gems. As a bonus, you can use spare spaces for farm accounts for kingdom buffs. With the rise of fully leadership garrisons, leadership equipment is back to the forefront, and the stat output these can give can make a huge difference filling non-piece stats as well as full sets. But where are they good and where are they not? First, where leadership gear is great. Of course, in fully mixed defenses like Lapu Lapu Hera and Hera YSS, leadership gear is a must because it gives total unit flexibility and helps overall keep the flexibility wide open and not run your kingdom short of a specific troop type in a defense and sustained fighting. However, the downside of this is that the equipment's harder to acquire for more established players, who are more likely to be garrisons. While the specialization to optimize the gear would fall under leadership, which limits its use to pretty much garrisons, where other gear can be used in field, garrison, and rally, making it less than ideal value for many players. However, the ultimate decision is yours, as leadership gear may just be here for a long time. Here are 3 future smite damage commanders I would love to see in Rise of Kingdoms. First would be a Cav rally, either to fully replace Attila or to go directly alongside him. Having variety of damage sources is healthy for the meta, and keeps the overall rallying garrison meta fluid, and Cavs could definitely use that damage variety to keep the pressure on and keep the rally meta healthy and varied. The second I would like to see is an archer garrison that does smite damage. This would be great to go alongside Dido, as well as going alongside Heraclius as well, but having an archer garrison overall that does a ton of smite damage and normal attack damage would be refreshing in the skill damage heavy archer meta and give something alternative for the archers. Last, but certainly not least, I would love to see a smite-based leadership garrison. Due to the fact that Heraclius is so recent, I imagine this is quite some time out, but a leadership garrison to go with Hera that make a swarm-resistant monster garrison would be quite refreshing to see. It would provide a great variety of defense options. Here's how new commander releases can help improve armaments. Right now, Rise of Kingdoms has an armament problem. Not referring to randomness or drop rates, there's a specific subsection of formations and armaments that just do not translate to meta commanders in the later game. In the early stages, stats can carry a good off formation like Echelon or Hollow Square on a normal commander to some measure of success with raw stats. But in the later game, when specialty inscriptions are used, so many formations just become unused outside of a single niche. However, Rise of Kingdoms has a unique opportunity as new commanders come out. With these clearly empty niches, new commanders can be created to fill those gaps, creating a much more balanced game with more freedom of choice and build order without having to change any formations. And with this opportunity, we also get a chance to try out unique kits, playstyles, and experiences that did not exist before, resulting in a win for formations, a win for developers, and a win for players. Here are the 3 civilizations that come host to the most meta commanders in the current meta. Note that these aren't about the civilizations themselves so much as the commanders that grace their ranks. First, we have Rome. You have the likes of Flavius in the garrison meta, Scipio Prime in the field meta, Trajan as a meta support, and really they're great in infantry and are only held back by being weak everywhere else. Next, we have China. You have Liang, you have Wo, you have Liu Che, all gracing the ranks of the field meta and being great, as well as the fact they have Guan and Sun Tzu, which are great alternatives to the meta as well. Last, but certainly not least, you have the Byzantines. Whether you want to talk about Justinian and his impact on the rally meta, Heraclius and his best in garrisons moniker, as well as the fact that you have Constantine making a huge comeback. The Byzantines do have a lot of variety and are also worthy of being on this list. Here are 3 commanders that break the standard mold for their troop types. First, Attila breaks the cavalry mold of being fragile and weak to swarm. So many Cav commanders even now are saddled with a weakness to swarm. Whether you talk about Khan, William, Joan, or even Jadwiga, the cavalry is typically categorized as being right next to archers and being weak to swarm. Enter Attila with the huge normal damage and such staying power that he's even now used years after release. It's easy to see why his sheer ability to resist swarm and wreak havoc on enemies is so wanted. Next, we have Heraclius. Leadership commanders are typically so weak, and besides YSS, many are relegated to weak positions, if any at all. Enter Hera, upending the whole dynamic and entering the meta at basically every point of garrisons, to the point that garrisons are viable based on how well they pair up against him. Lastly, we have Boudica and Hermann, who both break the heavy damage weak to swarm meta with a genuinely fun kit based around support rather than damage. Here are 3 commanders that are best left as secondaries. Whether it's weak talent selection, increased attention when they're primary, or just generally better synchronization with other commanders' kits. First, we have Heraclius. This should come as no surprise here, as Heraclius' only real weakness is talent selection, so it'd be natural to use him as a secondary as it covers his only real weakness. Next, we have William. William, similarly, has very, very weak talents, but has a great defense buff in AoE, and a generally fragile kit that leave him vulnerable to being swarmed when he runs as a primary, as people are more likely to notice him, leaving him as a better option to just be secondary behind the mountain of great cavalry field commanders that are good primaries. Last, but certainly not least, we have YSG and Liang, who both similarly to William tend to receive a lot of focus when they're primary, leaving them vulnerable to some nasty focus in swarm, leaving the best hidden behind a more intimidating primary commander. Welcome to another episode of the Boris Tip of the Week. In today's episode, we are covering how to heal effectively without using speed-ups. There are two main ways to do this. The first is the 90-minute rule. What you'll want to do is while you're online up to 20 times a day, you can heal 90 minutes worth of troops for free. If you start the healing and ask for help at 90 minutes of healing, it'll remove 3 minutes per help up to 30 times, so down to 90 minutes, and basically give you those 90 minutes worth of healing for free. After that, what you'll want to do is plan yourself to be about 30 to 35% longer than you're away. For example, in a day where I'm going to be gone for 12 hours, if I set it for 35% longer than that, or about 16 and some change, the 30 helps that come in will then reduce it back down to 12. What that does is gives me an extra 4 hours of speed ups that I didn't have to use any speed ups on. Using these two in pairs can save you a bunch of speed ups and keep you in the fight for longer. When it comes to garrisons, you have a lot of options for damage reduction. You have all damage reduction, you have normal damage reduction, and you have skill damage reduction. In today's video for garrisons, I want to cover my general priority in terms of which I want to have more of. Generally speaking, all damage is probably the best. It's not necessarily as good individually as normal damage or skill damage, but it gives you better coverage and brings up your average, which is super important to keeping your trade more even. On top of the fact that the general drop-off is much lower than you might anticipate, this is great. Second, we have normal damage reduction. This is better since the swarm heavy meta is so prevalent right now, and it's pretty much going to be better overall because of the sheer amount of swarmers. And the more people that swarm, the better the normal damage reduction becomes. Last but certainly not least, we have skill damage, which is still great 1v1, but it's just in the swarm heavy meta not nearly as impactful. Welcome to another episode of the Boris Tip of the Week. In this episode, we're covering Kahar chaining, one of my favorite things to do in Rise of Kingdoms. And this consists of trying to save AP by fighting multiple Kahars. You can do this with any AoE commander. Circle AoEs work better than triangular, but both work ultimately. So in this example, I'm using Artemisia YSG for the double AoE. And my goal here is to hit as many of these other Kahars as possible with the AoE so that it aggroes them. And what that does is it gets them attacking me, and now I don't have to attack them and use the 200 AP that I did before. And doing this, as you can see, I pulled 5 marches at once. The overall goal of this is to just save as much AP as possible. Obviously, the stronger commanders you can use, the better. I used Artemisia YSG here to show how effective it can be, but obviously it's a little fragile. Ultimately, you want to pick a commander that's strong for you and that's able to take the damage, but can save you a bunch of the AP in the process. With the release of Belisarius Prime, I wanted to touch base on how I personally determine the viability of commanders in Rise of Kingdoms. Since there are a lot of stats to consider, I try to simplify it down into 3 categories. First, how survivable is the commander? Sure, damage is great, but that damage does nothing if you're melted the second the enemy touches you. So just look at Khan, for example. Survivability means more fighting, no matter the role, and should be your first priority. Second, we have damage. Survivability is the priority, but no damage means you have nothing to do besides stand there and throw out normal attacks. So damage is a must as well. Last, but certainly not least, we have the unmeasurables, whether it's not as really survivability or damage. Buffs, debuffs, support, and other minor items that are conveniences are not specifically survivable. Can be good to determine viability, but only really outside of the first 2, which is why Sid has an insane disable and one of the best supports in the game, and is still fairly useless. When it comes to leadership garrisons, one of the top questions I get is how to set up the pair. So in today's video I wanted to cover that. You have 2 main ways to do this. First is the specialty mix. This is your Jan Hera, Gorgo Hera, etc. This can also be a fully mixed garrison pair with a single troop type gear. In this case, you'll want to maximize the unit-specific bonuses, so you want to have as close to 100% of that unit as possible while maintaining 3 unit types for your commander. To do this, you'll want 60 to 70% of your main troop type with 15 to 20% of each other. For example, Jan Hera will be 60 to 70% Cavs, and then 15 to 20% of the other 2. The allied fill should be his main troop type though. Next is the fully mixed defense. This has leadership gear and double mixed commanders. In this case, you'll want any proportion. However, you want to make sure you have at least 20% of each troop type. If you have a lot of armaments for a specific troop type, you can run closer to 50% of that, but otherwise you can run as close to even as possible, even 33, 33, 33. Here's why removing health and defense debuffs is huge for Scipio Milianus. Scipio Milianus has a skill that removes all health and defense debuffs when you're hit with a normal attack, which sounds pretty simple on paper, but may have a huge impact. Health and defense are the two most important stats of the three main stats, with health being the most important. Being able to remove those debuffs makes a commander instantly more tanky without having to actually have additional stats. This also prevents the enemy from removing any gained bonuses from gear, armaments, or secondary commander stats. This provides a sort of pseudo-tankiness without a ton of extra stats. With the prevalence of debuffers in the current meta, whether you're talking about Scipio Prime, Nevsky, or even some of the rallies and defenses, the use of debuff marches to support the garrison or counter rally, being able to shed those debuffs is huge to the survivability and viability of that commander pair in general, whether it's as a rally or in the field. This is a Smite talent tree review. With the release of the Smite talent tree, I wanted to cover a little bit of what I was thinking about it. First, of course, the keystone is Thunder Smite. It's a 30% chance to boost a Smite damage trigger by 10%. This is not a normal damage, this is just a Smite damage skill use, or a passive skill use. So it's not super game breaking, and honestly I think it's a little underpowered and underwhelming. Some of the other talents on the main path are great though. 6% less skill damage, 3% more counterattack damage, Fight or Flight's Rage gives you 90 rage lost on the enemy hit by your primary target skill, and anybody who gets hit by an AoE Smite skill. And Ambitious is a great but standard skill. I don't really care for Pack-a-Punch, because the 6% more normal damage versus 6% more Smite damage dealt means that you're taking more damage than you're dealing. And I love To the Bitter End because it builds up to 10% over 50 seconds, so it's great for rallies. Welcome to another episode of the Boris Tip of the Week. In this episode, we cover why health is so important. Health is by far the most impactful of the three main stats, and we'll go over the two major reasons that's the case. First is how health operates. Health increases the amount of damage the enemy needs to do to wound a unit, which reduces severely wounded units directly and indirectly counteracts a portion of that enemy's damage through attack, which is primarily what KvK tech gives, as well as attack being such a prevalent stat in essentially everything. Because of this, health reduces severely wounded units naturally, while also negating a portion of an enemy's stats, making it doubly valuable. Second, health is by far the least available of all three major stats. This makes it much less susceptible to diminishing marginal returns, the process by which successive increases in a stat result in less overall gain. This means even if you optimize for every last drop of health, you still won't come close to that diminishing marginal returns, and you can get extra value out of it. A big issue on armaments and inscriptions is what the most important part is for the armament system. So in today's video, I wanted to cover the major portions of this. Due to how broad they are, I'm going to break it down into three phases. First, in the early game, when you're just starting to get armaments, the formation itself has its own most important part. It constitutes the majority of bonus stat because it gives you a flat amount, and it leans heavily towards wedge and arch because skill and normal damage. Once you start to get built up purple and gold armaments, the stats become the most important, as the skill damage doesn't really stack up to 10% health across 4 different items. This is where formations are the most flexible, as the raw stats lead to a lot of variety. However, once you start reaching the end of armament buildup in the endgame content, the importance flexes back to formations, as the specialty inscriptions are tied to formations. So you want to have the specialty inscriptions that best optimize your type, and therefore are best in sync with that specific formation, so then you are more constrained by formations again. So with the release of the new true damage dealing commanders, there's a lot of hype about them being so strong. But there is something interesting I wanted to point out, and really the answer is right in front of us, in that health and damage reductions are the natural counters. So when you look at the skills, and you actually click true damage is not affected by the attacking troop's attack or the defending troop's defense. So that makes two things. One, your attack unit on your attacking march, if you are the one using this true damage, is not going to increase any of the damage. But the other thing is, it's ignoring the defense. That means it doesn't ignore health, and it does not ignore damage reduction when it's all damage reduction. So that's something important to consider, because that means that health will remain the top defensive stat to keep yourself alive, and really health is going to be that natural counter, and it's going to re-solidify its position as a very strong counter to this, as well as any other type of damage source. Here are the three most broken inscriptions that are non-specialty. First, of course, we have Ward. This is one of my favorites. It is a 5% damage taken reduction for 3 seconds on a 5-second cooldown on skill use. That's a 60% uptime if you can get consistent skill uses, and it's pretty much one of the better ways to reduce damage because it's all damage. Next, we have Respite. Similar, but you have on a basic attack. So when you're being swarmed, you have a 10% chance when you get hit with any basic attack to reduce damage by 10% for 2 seconds. That means when you're swarmed, you can have a potentially 40% uptime of a 10% damage reduction. Last, but certainly not least, we have anything that reduces damage, whether it's all damage, counterattack damage, skill damage. Any damage you can reduce is huge, so if you could stack these on inscriptions, it is completely valuable and worthwhile. Welcome to another episode of the Boris Tip of the Week. In today's video, we're covering why the non-set cavalry items are some of the best in the game. When it comes to gear sets, a lot of them are pretty set in stone. Archers will use either 4 or the full 6 out of 6, and that's because it's such a great synchronization and all the pieces are relatively similar. Infantry are typically replaced by leadership rather than their own offset pieces, but cavalry are unique because they have 2 different set pieces that are some of the best items in the game. So first we're going to talk about gloves. The armband gives you 7.5% defense, and the leg plates give you 11% attack. These can be replaced by Ash of Dawn, which is 1% more stat and a much better stat in health, and Navars, which is 0.5% more and 8% health. This means you can gain 20% health from 2 items that are non-set piece, and are among the best, and why they make such great value because health is just so impactful, and they replace attack and defense. Here are the top daily chess commanders by role. So first, we're going to be talking about rallies, and that is Tariq. He's still a pretty big player with Scipio Milianus, and there aren't really a lot of great alternative options that are super rally valuable, except for Nevsky, who we'll get to later, so this gets the nod for our rally option. Next, for garrisons, Hera is really the one you're going to want to talk about. He is the staple of the meta. He pretty much goes with every other garrison commander in the game, and he does so with distinction. He is hands down the best garrison commander in the game right now. And last, but certainly not least for the field, I'm going to go with Nevsky. He could also be a rally here, but he is just so valuable as a field commander because he goes with every other cavalry commander in the field that he really gets the nod here, and he's definitely still a good investment even years after his release. When it comes to resisting swarm, normal and counterattack damage does more for you, especially at high levels when you're being swarmed by 20 or more marches. But why is that? Today we're going to be talking about it. When it comes to AoEs, AoEs do great against 1 march, 2 march, maybe even 3 marches. However, as you get to successive marches, your AoE does reduce damage down to 50% possibly. Add on the fact that you are only able to hit up to 5 targets, and you get an AoE that can only hit 5 of the possibly 20 plus swarmers. Alternatively, normal and counterattack damage deal more damage on the basic attacks. So while the scale isn't as large as a skill damage effect, you will deal more damage to everybody who's hitting you because you're dealing more in the counterattack damage and normal damage. So as the swarmers get heavier and heavier, counterattack damage and normal damage become more and more impactful. Welcome to another episode of the Boris Tip of the Week. In this episode, we're covering what makes the ring and the horn such standard options for accessories. Overall, these are the gold standard for accessories, and there's a pretty good reason why. So first, the horn gives you an extra 50 rage on a 30% chance with no real cap. And the thing to remember there is rage works for smite commanders, true damage commanders, skill damage commanders. More skill uses is terrific, so it works for pretty much everybody. So that's something to keep in mind. Next, the ring gives a 10% chance to boost all damage, not skill damage, not smite damage. So because of that, it matches up with every commander just like the horn does. So the 2 of these together create 2 of the strongest buffs that work for all commanders, which makes them great generalist options. And while you do have some other options that work really great, like Vengeance or Greatest Glory, these tend to be the gold standard for accessories. But with that, we'll wrap up our year in review. This was definitely an interesting year for content, and I'm very much looking forward to another year of doing this as well. So let me know in the comments what was your favorite video, or your favorite month for videos, or a favorite topic that I covered that might have spanned multiple, like the Boris Tip of the Week, or the State of Garrisons. let me know down in the comments. If you want to see me cover another topic, let me know down in the comments, or join the Discord using the link in the description, as there is voting going on for content all the time there. And as always, good luck, fight well, and I will see you on the battlefield.